Do you know whether you are an upholder, questioner, obliger, or rebel? And if you're thinking, I have no idea what she's talking about, well, then you're actually in the perfect place because today I'm going to give an overview of the Four Tendencies framework. And I'll explain why this straightforward framework is actually really, really powerful. Not only can it help you with figuring out how to better create and maintain habits, it also gives you some really good insight into how to communicate with people who are different tendencies than yours. This is something that I have started using in my work, and I can tell you it's a bit of a game changer. Even though it's seemingly so straightforward, it's really one that makes an impact. Now, if we have not met, my name is Kat, and I help people uncover the hidden reasons they feel stuck so they can break free and start thriving. And the Four Tendencies is actually one of the things that I have really incorporated into my work. Once I understood that working against your tendency can actually be one of the reasons you're stuck, it's something that I started bringing up more and more. And I actually thought it was so impactful that I went out and I became a licensed workshop facilitator. So I've actually worked with teams to help them understand their tendencies and how they can start to work with them instead of against them. Now, if you are brand new to this, it's actually something that's by the author Gretchen Rubin, and she has an entire book on the Four Tendencies. So if this interests you, I highly recommend checking out this book. There's a lot of great information in there. But for the purposes of today, I just want you to get a feel for these four tendencies and what actually are they. So let's take a look. The Four Tendencies is all about expectations, inner expectations and outer expectations. So we either tend to meet or resist them. And depending on how we react to these inner and outer expectations determines our tendency. So let's take a look. The upholder is the first one, and upholders meet inner and outer expectations. So if they say they're going to do something like go for a walk every morning, that's an inner expectation and they're likely to follow through. Or an outer expectation like you have an assignment that is due at a certain time or you have a deadline at work, they also respond well to those. So these upholders tend to be really systematic and routine people who like structure. And this is one of the smaller groups. So you can usually tell when you're working with an upholder. They don't need to be reminded. They've got it all down. They've got a good system in place. Now, the next one we're going to look at is the questioner. So questioners, like upholders, tend to meet inner expectations. If they've done the research and they know exactly why they're doing something and they really believe in it, they don't have a problem doing it. However, they tend to resist outer expectations. So if somebody says to a questioner, I want you to do this, their first instinct is, well, why? What's going on? Why are you asking me to do this? They want to understand it and they want to get behind it before they do it. So they do not like just to be told this is the way we've always done it. They really want to understand why they're being expected to do something. And they do not like arbitrary rules. Now, I feel like it's worth mentioning, none of the four tendencies like arbitrary rules, but questioners and rebels tend to bristle more than the other two types. Now, the next one, we're going to look at rebels. So they share that resistance to outer expectations with the questioners, but with a rebel, they actually resist both inner and outer expectations. So not only do they struggle when someone else tells them what to do, they also struggle with themselves telling them what to do. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't get stuff done. There are actually a lot of really successful rebels, but they have to do it on their own terms. So they tend to do things when they want, how they want, kind of in their own way. And what's really important for a rebel is that sense of identity. So they're not going to do it because someone told them. They're going to do it because that's who they are. And finally, let's look at obligers. This is actually the largest group. So the research that the author did early on found that almost 40% of people are obligers. Now, obligers, they tend to resist the inner expectations. So if they say they're going to do something, they kind of struggle with it. But like an upholder, they respond really well to outer expectations. So they tend to meet those. Now, this is me. I am an obliger. So I respond well when there are outer expectations. If someone says, hey, this is what you're going to do, my reaction is naturally like, okay, my first reaction is to go along with it. I also don't like doing things just because someone said so, but my natural inclination is to go along with stuff. But when it comes to me just saying, hey, this is something I want to do, it tends to take the back seat or the back burner. I often will put priorities on external expectations before I do those inner expectations. Now, when you see them all mapped out, you can see what they have in common and how each of them share something, and we all have this different way of going about it. So think about this. Do you tend to meet or resist inner and outer expectations? Now, if you want to figure out which one you are, there's actually a free quiz, and I will link to that below. But there's a good chance that you might start to get an idea of which one you are. But it's not always clear, and I want to share a personal example of how I was kind of confused at first. Now, I knew I was not an upholder. I'm just not that systematic, and I don't love routine. I really like to mix things up a lot. And I knew I wasn't a rebel. I did not immediately resist anytime someone brings something up. However, the questioner really stood out for me, and I thought, maybe I'm a questioner. I love asking questions. I love understanding what I'm doing. I like to do these deep dives into research. And so I thought, maybe that's me, even though I knew that I struggled with my own inner expectations. But I thought, I have this 5-year journal, and I write in it every single day for the past 5 years, and no one told me to do it. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized a 5-year journal actually is a form of outer accountability. There is a date every single day for 5 years. So if you're going to write on September 13th, well, that's the date to write it. If I just had a big blank journal beside my bed and I told myself, write in this every day for 5 years, that's not going to happen. Now, my curiosity is still very healthy and alive, but I just happen to be a very curious obliger. So think about how you react when you first get asked to do something, an external expectation, and how you respond when you come up with your own inner expectations. But the quiz is a really great place to start. Now, I want to give you some examples of how I have seen this work with teams because it's really, really powerful. Now, one thing that really stood out to me is I actually did 2 different workshops where the leaders of the teams were questioners. And as a questioner, when people bring forward ideas to the boss, they would immediately start asking a bunch of questions because they want to understand the project. What they didn't realize about their tendency is that they were sort of giving this signal by accident to their staff that maybe the staff's idea wasn't so great because they would bring this forward and just be bombarded with questions. So once they understood that their tendency was that of a questioner and that they really needed to understand something, they were able to explain to their staff, hey, when you bring forward an idea, me asking questions is just my way of understanding it. It does not mean I don't like your idea. And that made a really big difference for the people on those teams. Now, another example is that for upholders who don't need reminders to do things, they would sometimes get a little bit exacerbated or frustrated with other people on the team who needed reminders or who would try and latch on to them as an upholder. And once they started to understand the 4 tendencies and that not everyone is as structured as them, and that there are people like obligers who need a little bit of external accountability and maybe some reminders work really well for them, they could start to ease off a little bit more. The other thing I noticed is that when people started to understand rebels on their team, they would start to realize how sometimes the way they were communicating with a rebel was actually pushing the rebel in the opposite direction. So when they would just come at them with directions and instructions and say, this is what you need to do, the rebel's instinct was to say, don't tell me what to do. And so it was causing conflict on the team. And another really powerful realization that I watched a team make is when they identified that they were leaning far too heavily on the obligers on the team, because the obligers were often willing to say, yeah, I'll do that. And they would kind of sign up for volunteer opportunities while the others would kind of quietly just let them. And so it was a way for them to look at the team dynamic and realize that there was not a fair balance. The more you understand both your tendency and the tendencies of the people around you, it can really change things, whether that's personally with your habits or whether that's in a team. Now, from a habit standpoint, the group I usually like to talk to the most are the obligers, because I know it made a big difference for me to understand that I responded well to outer expectation, but I tended to resist inner expectations. So I realized if I have a goal that I want to accomplish, I try to take it from an inner expectation and put it into an outer expectation. And I do that through outer accountability. So if you are an obliger like me and you struggle to get things done that you want to get done, try and turn it into an outer accountability and use that accountability tool as a way to get things done. Now, you might have to experiment, but it really can make a very big difference. And even if you're not an obliger, accountability can work if it meets your inner expectations, or for a rebel, if it meets your identity of if that's who you are. All of the 4 types can respond well to external accountability. Now, I hope that I have given you a bit of an overview of the 4 tendencies, and you can see how when we respond differently to expectations, it can change things. And I hope that you have a little bit of insight into maybe some of the places that you might be getting stuck. Now, if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and get more updates. I'll be weaving in these different ways that you can figure out how you might be getting stuck. And one of those might be if you are unknowingly swimming against the current and acting against your tendency.